My name is Captain Harper Doyle, United States Army Finance Corps. I have deployed 3 times, Germany, Kuwait, South Korea. And in 12 years of service, I have never once left a soldier behind me, on a road, in a convoy, in a firefight, in a paperwork nightmare at 3 in the morning. That is not a boast. It is training. It is muscle memory. You do not leave people behind. I remember the accident itself only in fragments, the way you remember a bad dream you weren't meant to fully wake from, headlights that were in the wrong lane, a horn that started a half-second too late to matter, the specific, absurd detail of my travel mug rolling under the brake pedal as the box truck's grill filled my windshield. I remember thinking in the strange, slowed-down math your brain does in half a second of crisis, I need both hands on this wheel, and then discovering that my body had already made the decision without me. The way training is supposed to work, the way it worked in Kuwait when a convoy in front of mine hit a pressure plate and every driver behind it braked in the same half-breath without a single radio call. 12 years of the Army teaching my body to react before my mind finished being afraid, and none of it, not 1 hour of combat lifesaver training, not one live fire exercise, had prepared me for what my own mother would say 6 hours later. 6 weeks before the night I'm about to tell you about, I gave birth to my daughter, Ivy. 6 weeks after that, a box truck ran a red light on Bragg Boulevard while I was driving home from an evening finance briefing, and I woke up in a curtained bay at Cape Fear Valley with 3 cracked ribs, a collapsed lung, and my right arm in a cast from wrist to elbow. My husband Marcus was in Denver at a teaching conference, 5 hours out by the earliest flight he could get. Someone had to be with our 6-week-old daughter that night. My mother lived 19 minutes away. She said no. I want to start there, because that single word is the reason you're listening to this story at all. I came up out of the anesthesia haze to a nurse repeating my name, my ribs feeling like someone had parked a truck on my chest, which, in a manner of speaking, someone had. The curtain around my bay was the color of old teeth, and somewhere past it a monitor was beeping in a rhythm that didn't match my own heartbeat, which I found strangely more upsetting than the pain. A tech had cut my scrub top away at the shoulder to get to the IV line, and the plastic ID band on my left wrist was already printed with the wrong middle initial. A small clerical error that would irritate me for exactly as long as it took me to remember I had bigger things to be irritated about. Marcus was on speaker on the pillow next to my head, his voice doing the flat, controlled thing it does when he's terrified and trying not to let it show. The same voice he probably uses with a room of 9-year-olds during a fire drill. "Harper," he said. "The sitter has to leave by 10. I called your mom. I already knew. She won't come." There was a pause, and behind it I heard something faint and unmistakable. The tinny jingle of a slot machine paying out, the murmur of a casino floor. My mother, Diane, was at Cherokee with her book club, and she told Marcus she couldn't leave because she was watching Brooke's cat while my sister was on a beach trip to Destin. A cat. My 6-week-old daughter needed a human being for the night, and the answer was a cat. I did not cry. I want you to understand that, because everyone expects the woman in the hospital bed to fall apart, and I didn't. I looked at the ID band on my left wrist. Then I reached for the phone with my good hand because I had a great deal to take care of, and taking care of things under pressure was, professionally speaking, my entire job. You should know who I was before that night because it explains everything that came after. I grew up in a rented duplex 2 miles from where Fort Bragg's water tower is visible over the tree line, close enough to salute distance every morning without knowing it. ROTC paid for the college my family couldn't. I commissioned into the Finance Corps because I was good with numbers and because the Army, unlike my house growing up, told you exactly where every dollar was supposed to go and held you accountable if it didn't. I liked that. I still like that. Marcus taught 4th grade. When I deployed, he ran our household solo, bath time, bake sales, the whole apparatus of a small child's life, and he never once made me feel like I owed anyone an apology for choosing this uniform. We built a life that looked ordinary from the outside. 1 modest house near Hope Mills, 1 paid-off car, no debt. That ordinary life is the only reason what I'm about to tell you was even possible. For 9 years, since before Marcus and I married, I had been sending money home, not from our joint checking account, from a military allotment, a standing order that pulls straight from a service member's pay before it ever hits a bank account. Hazard duty pay, family separation pay, combat zone tax exclusion, money that felt, each time, like it wasn't quite mine to keep, because I'd earned it by being away from my own family, so why not send it to the family I'd left behind? $4,500 a month, 9 years, and Marcus never saw a dime of it move, because it never touched anything we shared. He knew I kept a separate account, money from my enlisted years, my grandmother's small inheritance, the kind of thing a lot of military spouses agree to keep separate in case the Army decides otherwise for you. He never asked what it was for. That was my failure, not his. I told myself it was for my father's heart condition and the little loan on my parents' land. I told myself I was the only one steady enough to carry it. Being the steady one had become its own kind of rank, and I had pinned it to myself so long ago, I'd forgotten it wasn't actually in order. That night, the first thing I did was not revenge. The first thing I did was solve the actual problem, because that is what 12 years of training does to a person. With my left thumb, I called the new Parent Support Program Duty Line, a real resource the Army keeps running for exactly this kind of gap: deployed adjacent parents, medical emergencies, nobody home. I gave the woman on the phone my name, my rank, my situation, my address, in about 9 sentences, calm as a Tuesday brief. She asked if the baby was medically stable. "She's perfect," I said. "I'm the one who isn't." 40 minutes later, a family advocacy nurse named Odette let herself into our house with the code Marcus had given the program and texted me a photo of Ivy asleep with her fist against her cheek. I looked at that photo for a long time. The ER nurse beside me watched me set the phone down and asked, gently, if I had family who could come. "It's handled," I said. "Next." She blinked. People always blink when you don't perform the breakdown they're braced for. I wasn't being cold. I was triaging, the way you triage when you have spent your whole adult life being the only calm person in a room full of panic. My daughter was safe. My husband was in the air. My rids would knit. There was exactly one item left on my personal list that night, one I had carried for 9 years and never once let myself touch. And now my left hand was free and my mind, for the first time in a long time, was very, very clear. I want to tell you about that clarity honestly because it wasn't peace. It was closer to the feeling you get in the seconds after an alarm goes off in the middle of the night and your body is already moving before your brain has caught up, a kind of readiness with nowhere left to aim itself. I had spent 12 years training for the moment. Something went wrong. I had never once trained for the moment I realized the thing that had gone wrong was not the truck. The truck was just the accident. My mother's answer on the phone was the injury that was actually going to take 9 years to heal. I need to back up because the story doesn't make sense unless you understand what an allotment actually is, and why a woman who reads balance sheets for the Army could still let 9 years pass without asking a single hard question. When you enlist or commission, you can direct a fixed portion of your pay to go anywhere before you ever see it: a bank, a family member, a savings bond. It is meant for things like sending money home to a spouse during a long deployment. It is not something your household budget touches, because it is designed not to be touched. That's the entire point of the feature. Mine had been set up when I was 25, a Lance Corporal's daughter freshly commissioned, sitting across a desk from a finance NCO the week after my father's first cardiac scare. I authorized $4,500 a month and never revisited the paperwork again, because revisiting it would have meant admitting I didn't trust where it was going, and not trusting my own mother felt at 25. Like a betrayal worse than any lie she could tell me. My grandmother, Colleen, understood that weakness in me before I did. Colleen was my mother's stepmother by marriage, but she raised Diane from the age of 9 after Diane's own mother passed, and she was the only person in that family who ever spoke to me like I had since. She had been a Gold Star widow once. Her first husband killed near Kefsan in 1968 before she remarried my grandfather Walter, and she never talked about the years right after except once at Thanksgiving, the year before she died. She took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman who smelled like coffee and gun oil from Walter's reloading bench in the garage, and said, "Somebody has to watch this family's money, and your mother won't. So it'll have to be you." I thought she meant be generous. I understand now she meant be vigilant. There is a difference, and it took a truck and a hospital bed to teach it to me. Marcus and I married when I was 26. We agreed to wait on children, partly because the Army's deployment cycle made it sensible, and partly because there was always something my family needed first. And somewhere in my chest I believed that needing to be needed was the same thing as being loved. I built a whole marriage, a whole career around being the load-bearing wall. If I was holding the house up, no one could remove me from it. That is not humility. I want to be honest about that. It was fear wearing a uniform. I met Marcus at a 4th of July cookout on post, back when I was a fresh second lieutenant who still ironed her PT belt out of nerves rather than regulation. He taught at the elementary school just off Yadkin Road, the one full of the sons and daughters of soldiers who moved every 2 or 3 years and needed one adult in their life who wasn't going anywhere. He liked that I was steady. I liked that he never once treated my uniform like a personality trait, the way some civilians do, either worshiping it or resenting it. He just treated it like my job, the way his classroom was his. When I deployed to Kuwait for 11 months during our 2nd year of marriage, Marcus ran our entire household. The bills, the car inspection. A burst pipe under the kitchen sink, he fixed himself off a YouTube tutorial and mailed me letters that never once mentioned how hard any of it was, because he knew I needed to focus on my own convoy schedules, not his plumbing. I have never told him, until I sat down to put the story into words, how much that silence of his cost him and how much it saved me. He gave me an entire marriage with no strings attached, while I was quietly attaching every string I had to a family that never once asked what the rope was made of. My grandmother Colleen used to say that some families run on love and some families run on ledgers, and the dangerous ones are the families that run on ledgers while insisting, loudly, that they run on love. I didn't understand that sentence until I was 34 years old, lying in a hospital bed with a cast on my arm, finally doing the arithmetic she'd been begging me to do for a decade. There is a particular kind of loneliness to being the finance officer on a deployment, one nobody warned you about at the academy or in any leadership course. Soldiers come to you with their whole lives on paper, a wife back home who's overdrawn the checking account, a young private trying to figure out why his combat pay didn't post, a staff sergeant quietly asking how to set up an allotment to a parent with dementia because nobody else in the family will do it responsibly. I got very good, in Kuwait, at telling other people's families the truth about money, plainly and without flinching, because it wasn't personal. I could look a 20-year-old specialist in the eye and say your girlfriend has spent $400 at a nail salon while you've been eating gravel in the desert, and you need to decide what that means to you. Without my voice shaking even slightly, it never once occurred to me, in 11 months of doing that job with total clarity for total strangers, to turn that same plainness on my own allotment. I could audit anyone's family but mine. Before Ivy was born, every parent in my unit with a deployment-eligible status has to file something called a Family Care Plan, a DA Form 533-5 on record with the rear detachment, naming the people who will step in if the service member cannot be there. It is not a suggestion. It is a readiness requirement. My mother signed that form as my secondary caregiver, 18 months before Ivy arrived. She sat at my kitchen table, signed her name in blue ink, and told me she was honored to be trusted with it. Ugh, the night of the accident, I didn't just need a grandmother. I needed the person on that form to answer the phone. She didn't. And because of that, the call I had to make wasn't only to a babysitting service, it was to my rear detachment commander the next morning, informing him that my listed emergency caregiver had been unreachable, which is the kind of sentence that gets flagged, reviewed, and quietly follows a soldier's readiness file for a long time afterward. My mother had put a mark on my record without ever knowing it, the same way she had put a hole in my finances without ever telling me the truth about where it went. Major Ferris, my rear detachment commander, was kind about it on the phone. In the careful, procedural way officers are kind about things that will still end up in a folder somewhere. "We'll note that the plan needs updating, Captain," he said. "These things happen. Family care plans fail more than people think." I thanked him and hung up and lay there with the phone against my chest, feeling something I hadn't expected to feel about my own mother. Not just hurt, but professional embarrassment. The specific shame of having vouched for someone on an official document and having them fail you in front of the exact system that had asked you to trust them. I lay in that hospital bed and made myself sit with a question I had avoided for 9 years. Why had I done it? The easy answer, the one strangers offer, is that I was starved for approval. That answer is wrong, and if you have ever been the dependable one in your family, you already know why. I did it because somewhere along the way, I decided that being needed was the same as being safe. Nobody removes the wall holding up the roof, Around midnight, Marcus called again from his layover in Charlotte, and this time he gave me the conversation with my mother, word for word, because he knew I would want it exactly as it happened. He'd called her at 9, explained I was in surgery, asked her to please just drive the 19 minutes. She'd sighed, the long theatrical sigh she uses on waiters and relatives, and said she really couldn't, because Brooke was finally getting her dream trip and somebody had to watch the cat. And besides, Brooke never has these emergencies, as if the truck that hit me had checked my family rank before it ran the light. After we hung up, I opened my banking app with my left thumb, the login screen glowing like a small cold moon in the dark bay. I did not go to our joint account. I went to the Defense Finance and Accounting Service portal, the one that manages every uniformed service member's pay and allotments, and I pulled up my standing deductions. I knew them by heart the way you know a scar. Diane Frank support $2,000, home loan assist $700, dad medical $900, Brooke support $900, $4,500 a month, 108 months, and I had never once let myself add the total because the total felt like a door I could not walk back through. So I made myself look. 9 years, $486,000, almost $500,000 gone out of my life, one automated allotment at a time, while my mother told the relatives we managed on our own. Canceling a military allotment is not 4 taps on an app. I had to call the DFAS overnight line myself, give my SSN and rank, explain, with the lungs still recovering and a nurse hovering nearby, that I needed emergency modification of all 4 standing deductions effective the next pay cycle. The airman on the other end of the line, hearing the strain in my voice, put a supervisor on. It took 11 minutes. It felt like 11 years. "Ma'am, I have to read you the standard notice before I process this," the supervisor said, and then read it flat and official about processing windows and the next, leave and earnings statement. And I lay there with my eyes closed, listening to a stranger recite Army boilerplate over my open chest wound of a decade, thinking, this is either the most anticlimactic revenge in the history of the world, or exactly the right size for how quiet the truth actually deserves to be. "Confirmed," the supervisor said finally. "All 4 allotments will be zeroed out effective next LES." I felt no triumph and no grief, just a strange, flat clarity, the exact feeling of a ledger finally balancing after you've spent a decade avoiding the reconciliation. Then, closing the portal, my eye caught a line item I'd never scrolled to before, buried under the dad medical label from 2 years back. Transfer, M. Brooke, $18,000. My father's cardiologist had never seen that money. My sister had. I locked the phone and lay there listening to the monitor count my heartbeat, and I understood, finally, that I had spent 9 years funding a story about my family instead of the actual family. The actual family had just chosen a cat. I thought about the day I set the first allotment up. 25 years old, freshly commissioned, sitting across a metal desk from a finance NCO who asked twice if I was sure I wanted the deduction to be irrevocable. Feeling in that way, voluntary things become once shame gets involved. I remembered saying yes both times without hesitating because my father had called me sobbing about a hospital bill the week before, and I had decided right there in that chair that this was simply what a good daughter did. Nobody in that room warned me that a good daughter and an unlimited line of credit can look identical from the outside for almost a decade before anyone bothers to check the difference. My sister Brooke is 28, an aspiring lifestyle influencer with about 9,000 followers, and she called me on FaceTime from a beach chair in Destine less than an hour after her card declined at a beachfront cafe. Sunburn already blooming across her nose. "Harper, finally," she said, holding the phone too close. "My card got declined, like humiliating. Did you touch something? Mom said the family account always covers me." The family account. My sister genuinely believed the $900 a month appeared from some communal well our mother managed, because our mother had told her years ago that a military spouse and family assistance fund, something she made sound official, something with a name, a program, a plausible shape, quietly covered things for military families like ours, and that if Brooke ever had a problem, she should just call Harper because Harper knew how to reach them. I had been my mother's customer service line for a lie I never wrote. I asked Brooke if she knew I'd been in an accident. "Wait, what? Are you being dramatic right now?" A steel drum started somewhere behind her. "Can you just fix the card? I have a shoot tomorrow." There was a small crack in her voice underneath the annoyance, though one I hadn't expected. "Wait, seriously, are you okay?" she asked, almost as an afterthought, and I could hear her actually turn down the noise around her just for a second before someone called her name from the pool deck and she turned right back toward it. I told her I'd look into it, which was true, and that I had to go, which was also true. My sister wasn't cruel, not exactly. She was something almost worse, a person who had never once been asked to imagine the well had a bottom, because no one had ever let her see who was carrying the bucket. Our mother had told her once years earlier about something called a military spouse and family assistance fund, a phrase official sounding enough that Brooke had simply filed it under things she didn't need to understand. The way you don't ask exactly how electricity gets to the outlet. If the account ever hiccuped, Mom had said, just call Harper. She knows how to reach them. She deals with that kind of paperwork for a living. It was, I would realize later, a perfectly engineered lie. Specific enough to sound real, vague enough that Brooke would never think to verify it, and routed, always, back through me. By morning, the family group chat was already lit up. My mother had posted a paragraph beginning, "I'm heartbroken to say Harper is being dramatic and has cut off her struggling parents out of spite," and my Aunt Denise had already replied with 3 broken heart emojis and shame on her, kicking a sick man when he's down. A cousin I hadn't spoken to since a wedding 3 years earlier sent a single praying hands emoji, as if that settled something. I read it once, set the phone face down, and changed Ivy's diaper one-handed with a calm I hadn't felt in a decade. Explaining myself was the old me. The new me, the one the truck had apparently installed, wanted the numbers in the room, and I knew exactly where to find them. Marcus walked into my hospital room the next morning at 11, unshaven, gray with exhaustion, carrying Ivy in her car seat and a diaper bag over one shoulder. He'd landed, driven straight to relieve Odette, and brought our daughter to me without stopping to change his own shirt. He set the car seat on the bed and just looked at me, the cast, the bruising along my jaw, and his eyes filled. I told him not to, because if he started, I would too, and I still had work to do. He lifted Ivy out and laid her on my chest, mindful of my ribs, and for 1 minute the 3 of us just breathed together, which is the only part of that entire week I would happily live again. Ivy made a small indignant noise at being moved and then settled, and Marcus sat on the edge of the bed with his hand on both of us at once. And for 60 whole seconds, nothing in my family's history mattered at all. Then my phone rang. My father, Frank, 64, the man whose heart I'd been quietly funding for 9 years. "Pixie," he said, using the nickname he hadn't used since I was small. "I didn't know it got this bad. The money, the accident. I didn't know." For one suspended second, I believed he might actually do it, might finally stand up in his own house. "I never wanted you carrying all of it," he said, and I heard him take a breath like a man about to step off a ledge. Then behind him, my mother's voice, sharp and low, asking who he was talking to. The line went muffled, a hand pressed over the speaker. When he came back, his voice had flattened, retreated. "I should go, feel better." And he hung up. That was my father, in one phone call. A good man who had spent 40 years learning that the safest thing to do in that house was nothing at all. My grandfather, Walter Reyes, is 78, a retired sergeant major who spent 30 years running logistics and finance for units that could not afford a single missing line item, and everyone in the family, including my mother, still calls him Gunny out of old habit. He walked into my hospital room 3 hours after the accident in a pressed flannel shirt, moving carefully with a cane he clearly resented, carrying a cardboard file box under one arm. He'd called both hospitals in the county until he found the right one. He set the box on the foot of my bed, like a man setting down something heavy he'd carried a long way. "Your mother said you'd had a fender bender," he said. I drove past 3 exits before I believed her. Then he sat, folded his hands over the head of his cane, and said the sentence I will hear for the rest of my life. I knew. I always knew. "Knew what?" I asked. "About the money. All 9 years of it. About where your mother's been spending her Saturdays. About what she's told this family while you bled yourself dry." He tapped the box once. "Not tonight, though. You've got enough tonight. We'll do this proper, in front of everyone, where she can't slip out the side door." Before he left, he told me one piece of it because he said I shouldn't walk into a family dinner blind. "My grandmother Colleen," he said, had not simply slipped away peacefully the way I'd been told. In her last year, she'd grown suspicious of my mother's spending, the new patio furniture, the casino trips she stopped hiding, and she'd started asking quiet questions. Colleen had been a Gold Star widow once, and after her first husband's death, a well-meaning uncle had managed her survivor benefits for 2 years before she discovered there was almost nothing left. She never forgot what it felt like to trust the wrong person with a ledger, and she was not going to watch her granddaughter walk the same road unwarned. She cornered me one evening, Walter said, and told me, "Somebody is keeping Diane afloat, and it isn't us. Find out who." Took me a while. Bank's not exactly eager to talk to an old man, but I ran books for a battalion for 3 decades. I know how to follow a number when it doesn't want to be followed. I found you. 9 years of a granddaughter quietly signing her combat pay over into a hole her mother kept digging. She used to talk about the year after her first husband died. Walter went on quieter now, and I realized I had never once heard him speak about Colleen's life before him, as though that chapter had always belonged only to her. 24 years old, a folded flag on her lap, and an uncle who told her he'd handle the paperwork on her survivor benefits so she wouldn't have to think about money while she grieved. 2 years later, there was almost nothing left, and by the time she understood what had happened, the uncle had a good excuse for every dollar and a family who believed him over her, because grief made her look unstable and made him look generous. She told me once that the worst part wasn't the money. It was watching people decide she was too fragile to be trusted with her own life, right when she needed to be trusted with it the most. He tapped the arm of the chair. She never let that happen to anyone she loved again, if she could help it. That's the whole reason for that box. Colleen had spent her last clear months with Walter and a lawyer, setting something in motion before she ran out of time. "There's a trust," Walter said at the door. "Your grandmother made sure of it. Whatever your mother tells you Sunday, your grandmother trusted you with everything. That's why she chose you." The next day he came by to check on me, and I asked the question that had haunted me my whole life. Why Brooke? Why had her mother spent 30 years treating one daughter like a keepsake and the other like a utility bill? "You have to understand how Colleen raised her," Walter said, turning his coffee cup slowly. "Colleen was fair mostly, but hard. And she had a favorite, and it wasn't your mother, it was your Uncle Danny, God rest him. Diane grew up being the one who managed things while Danny got the love. When Diane had you and you turned out steady and capable, just like she'd had to be, something in her couldn't stand it. When Brooke came along, loud and bright and needy, Diane finally got to be the mother of the favorite instead of the forgotten one." He set the cup down. "It's not an excuse, it's just the shape of it." "And the casino?" I asked. He was quiet a moment, and for the first time since he'd walked into my hospital room, the old soldier in him looked almost tired rather than sturdy. "The casino was the one place your mother ever felt like she might win something she hadn't had to earn by being useful to somebody else first," he said. "That's not me excusing it, Harper. A person can understand a wound and still be responsible for what they do with it. I just think you deserve to know it wasn't only greed. It was old hunger, dressed up as a slot machine. I sat with that a long time. My mother wasn't a villain, twirling a mustache. She was a woman who had been the unloved load-bearing wall in her own mother's house, and instead of breaking the pattern, she'd handed it down to me and crowned my sister in her image. Understanding her completely, it turned out, did not obligate me to keep paying for her. The day before the dinner, Marcus propped my laptop on the rolling hospital table, and I did the one thing that has never failed to steady my hands. I built a spreadsheet. With my left hand and a great deal of patience, I exported 9 years of allotment records and dropped them into a pivot table. This is what I do for the United States Army. I could certainly do it for my own life. I sorted the $486,000 by where it actually landed. The real medical expenses. My father's cardiologist, his prescriptions came to about $65,000 across 9 years. The land loan, the one I believed I was steadily paying down, had received exactly $11,000. That left roughly $410,000 unaccounted for, and it split into 2 rivers. The first river, nearly $290,000, was cash pulled in small, dignified amounts, almost all of it within 2 miles of the Harrah's Cherokee Casino, 3 hours west. My mother hadn't just had one unlucky night at the tables. She had been going for the better part of a decade on my combat pay while telling a dozen relatives we manage on our own. The second river ran to Brooke, around $120,000, including that $18,000 transfer filed under my father's surgery to hide it inside the one category nobody in the family would ever question. I called Priya Nadaraj, a JAG lieutenant colonel and my closest friend since Officer Basic, and asked her the question I hadn't dared ask a stranger. If my grandmother put land and money into a trust before she died and left it to me instead of my mother, can my mother fight that? Depends on the state and the paperwork, Priya said, and I could hear her shuffling something on her own desk 3 states away, treating my worst week like a Tuesday case file, which was exactly the steadiness I needed from her. North Carolina doesn't guarantee children a share of a parent's estate the way spousal elective share works. That protection exists for surviving spouses, not adult kids. If your grandmother was competent, had independent counsel, and nobody coerced her, and if Walter's attorney did this the way Career Logistics, NCOs, do everything, which is to say by the book, with a capacity evaluation on file, there's very little for your mother to fight with. Undue influence claims almost never survive when the paper trail is that clean. And if she says I manipulated Colleen from the outside, I was deployed for half of that year, then that's your alibi, Harper, not your liability, Priya said, and I could hear the small, tired smile in her voice. You were in Kuwait signing hand receipts while your grandmother met with an attorney in Raleigh. That's about as far from undue influence as this army can put a person. I printed the spreadsheet summary page to a single sheet on the ward's shared printer, 12 rows, 9 years, the entire architecture of my family's secret, finally small enough to hold in one hand. It's handled, I said, mostly to myself, and for the first time the words felt less like triage and more like a verdict. My mother is, I will give her this, a gifted performer, and Sunday she opened strong. She'd summoned the whole family. My father Frank, Aunt Denise, 2 cousins, Brooke back early from Destin with a fresh sunburn and a confused expression, under the banner of welcoming baby Ivy and clearing the air. I still wore the cast. I still wore the hospital ID band, 5 days old, now gone soft and gray, which I had kept on purpose and peeled off only in the driveway, tucking it into my coat pocket like a small, hard piece of proof. Walter arrived separately, tapping up the walk with his cane, the file box under his arm. You ready? He asked on the porch. I'm ready, I said, and meant it in a way I never had before. We walked in together, 3 generations my mother least wanted under one roof, carrying a car seat, a cast, an ID band, and a box. Through the front window I'd already seen the tableau assembling itself, Denise pouring coffee she hadn't been asked to pour, Frank sunk into his recliner with the posture of a man bracing for weather, Brooke perched on the arm of the couch scrolling her phone, sunburned and oblivious, the 2 cousins hovering near the appetizer table like witnesses who hadn't yet realized they'd been summoned to testify. My mother crossed the room with her hand pressed to her chest, eyes already glistening for the audience. There's my grandbaby, she cooed, reaching for Ivy, and Marcus angled the car seat away, gentle but immovable, and the reach turned into a flutter, and the flutter turned into the first act of the evening. She turned to the relatives instead. I am just so relieved we're all here because this has been the hardest week of my life. Her life. The week I'd spent in a hospital bed had been the hardest week of her life. She told them, voice trembling on cue, that her daughter had had a little accident, thank God, and used it as an excuse to abandon her struggling parents out of some imagined grievance. Denise nodded along, though she wouldn't quite look at me. I would learn later that she already had a printed page of my own sitting somewhere in the back of her mind by then. Then my mother delivered the line she'd used to win every room for 30 years, turning at last to face me. I don't understand where this cruelty comes from. Brooke never has these emergencies. The 4th time in 5 days. She had no idea she'd just loaded the gun and handed it to me, grip first. I did not stand and make a speech. I unfolded one printed page from the diaper bag, smoothed it flat against my thigh, and set it in the center of the table where the light from the fixture fell on it. You're right, Mom, I said in the same level voice I used to brief a battalion commander. Brooke never has these emergencies. I'd like to show everyone why. I slid the page forward. This is every dollar the Army has paid me for 9 years of hazard duty and family separation, and where it actually went. $486,000. The top 2 rows are real. $65,000 for Dad's heart, $11,000 toward the land loan. I let that sit one beat. The rest is the part Mom tells everyone she manages on her own. $290,000 in cash, almost all of it within 2 miles of the casino at Cherokee, and $120,000 to Brooke, including $18,000 once filed under Dad's surgery so nobody would ask. A small sound went around the room, an intake of breath, the sound of a story cracking. My mother's mouth opened, reaching for her only remaining tool. That is twisted. You've twisted everything. Your father and I never. I only borrowed a little from Frank's account, she said suddenly to the room in the same wounded register, as if this were still evidence of her suffering rather than a confession, just to take the edge off. Everyone needs to breathe sometimes, and she heard herself say it a half-second too late, the whole room hearing it with her, and for one long moment, nobody moved. That's when Walter set his cane against the table and laid the file box down beside my single page. He opened it with the unhurried hands of a man who had waited a year for this exact moment. I knew, he said to the relatives, not to Diane. Colleen knew too. At the end, she had her lawyer trace every dollar. He drew out a stapled document, a Boulder, no, a Raleigh firm's letterhead on the cover. This is your grandmother's trust and mine. Last spring, Colleen and I moved the land, this house, and the accounts into it. He said it where everyone could hear. It does not go to Diane. Diane doesn't manage a dollar of it. It goes to Harper and to Ivy's schooling fund. The rest stays in trust, the way Colleen wanted, where it can't be gambled away. My mother's wounded matriarch mask fell off entirely, and underneath was raw panic, because the house she was standing in had just been handed away in a stapled document to the daughter she'd left in a hospital bed. You'll regret this, she hissed. I'll fight that trust. I'll get a lawyer. It was never your home, Diane, Walter said. Mild as milk. It was your mother's. And a lawyer already looked at the paperwork before we ever sat down here. There isn't much to fight. My father lifted his head, the same flicker I'd caught once before, on the phone. Diane, he started, barely a whisper. The casino, you know it's. My mother's head snapped toward him, and the look she gave him was 40 years old. He stopped. He looked back down at his hands. That was my father's last word on the subject, and I felt something in me let him go gently for good. I turned to Aunt Denise, who had gone pale. You called me cruel for kicking a sick man when he's down, Denise. $290,000 of what I sent went to a casino, not a cardiologist. I think you already knew that before tonight. It wasn't a threat, it was a fact, and she knew it. Brooke was crying now, actual tears in the corner, not for me, but in the dawning horror of a young woman realizing the well had a bottom and she had been standing on the person at the bottom of it. The scholarship, she said quietly, to no one in particular, like she was trying the word out to see if it would still hold weight in her mouth. Mom said it was a scholarship. There was never a scholarship, Brooke, I said, and for the first time all evening my voice softened, because none of this had ever been her fault first. There was only me. My mother tried one more time, the tears drying faster now because they had never quite been real to begin with, sliding from outrage into something closer to negotiation. Harper, honey, we can fix this. We're family. But her voice had stopped being able to reach me, the way a song stops mattering once you finally left the room it was playing in. I stood slowly because the rib still didn't allow for drama even when the moment called for it, and I took Ivy's car seat from Marcus. I reached into my coat pocket, took out the soft gray hospital band, and looped it once around the handle of my daughter's car seat, where I would see it every time I carried her. Not the ledger, not the spreadsheet, not the box. That little band was the whole story. The night I nearly died and my family checked a beach forecast. Walter gathered his box and his cane, and the 3 generations my mother least wanted under one roof walked back out into the cold October evening. I pulled the door shut behind us with my good hand, softly, because slamming it would have meant I still wanted something from the people on the other side. I didn't. Here's how it settled, because I know you want to know. The trust held. My mother called 2 attorneys, and both told her the same thing Priya had told me on the phone from my hospital bed. Clean paperwork and a competent grantor are very hard to beat. The threats quietly stopped. My parents still live in the house because the trust lets them stay there for their lifetimes. I am not in the business of putting a man with a bad heart out on the curb, whatever his silence has cost me. But Cherokee no longer runs on my combat pay, and a casino with no fresh money is just a room with carpet. Brooke got a job, a real one, at a marketing firm in Raleigh that does not care about her follower count. Last I heard, she was learning, slowly, that a launch you fund yourself feels different than one your sister funded for you. She texted me once, months later, 3 words, "Where did it go?" I sent her the same single page I'd set on the table. She never replied, but she also never asked me for money again. And Denise told the extended family the truth, exactly as I knew she would. The group chat went quiet for a long while after that, and when it started up again months later, it was smaller, plainer, mostly logistics about holidays, which I have come to think is what a family group chat should have been all along. My father calls sometimes, always, when he's alone in the car, in the grocery store parking lot, or idling in the driveway before he goes inside, and I always pick up. We don't talk about the dinner. We talk about Ivy's first steps, about a fishing trip he wants to take her on someday, about nothing at all, which after 40 years of him saying nothing at all in a much heavier way, has started to feel less like avoidance and more like the first draft of an actual relationship. Odette, the family support nurse who let herself into my house that first terrible night, still sends Ivy a card every birthday, and last year she added a line at the bottom that read, "You did the hard part before I ever got there. I just held the baby." I keep that card in the same drawer as the printed spreadsheet. Walter sold his place across town and moved into a small rental 10 minutes from us. He comes for Sunday dinner every week now, and he still brings the box, sets it on my bookshelf, and says, "In case anybody forgets." Marcus jokes that between Walter's box and my spreadsheets, our house has better financial documentation than most small businesses. And I tell him that's exactly the point. A family that keeps its receipts is a family that can't be lied to twice. Priya still calls once a month, mostly to talk about nothing, though she did mention in passing that she's used an anonymized version of my allotment case in a legal assistance briefing for junior soldiers now, under the heading "Know Where Your Money Goes, especially when you trust the person it's going to." I told her that was fine, as long as nobody used my name. Marcus asked me once, not long after, whether I regretted letting my parents stay in the house at all, given everything. I told him no, and I want to be precise about why, because I think this is the part people get wrong about stories like mine. I didn't let them stay because I forgave them. I let them stay because Colleen wanted it that way, and because I refused to become another version of my mother, someone who turns kindness into leverage. But every dollar that moves through that house now has my name on the paperwork, not on a promise. That is not mercy. That is a boundary with an audit trail. If there is one thing I learned from a hospital bed, a box of old files, and 11 minutes on hold with a finance clerk at midnight, it is this: the people who praise you for being the strong one are usually just naming the person they've quietly decided they will never have to carry. And the day you stop being their bank is the day you finally get to be something better. Which, for me, was simply a mother to my own daughter. Instead of a quartermaster for everyone who refused to grow up, Ivy is 2 now. She doesn't understand any of this yet, and someday when she's old enough, I plan to tell her the whole thing plainly, the way Colleen would have wanted. The way a ledger tells the truth, whether or not anyone in the room wants to hear it. I'll tell her that her grandmother chose a cat over her, once, on the worst night of my life, and that it is possible to forgive a person's fear without funding it forever. I'll tell her that her great-grandmother, a woman she will only know from photographs and a rental house 10 minutes away, spent the last months of her own life making sure the people who actually showed up would never again be mistaken for the people who didn't. Marcus and I keep 2 accounts now, still, one joint, one separate for each of us, the way plenty of military couples do, but there is no longer anything hidden in mine. He knows the number. He has always deserved to know the number. The only thing that changed is that now, so does everyone else who ever asks where the family's money really goes. We are trained, in this uniform, never to leave anyone behind. Nobody ever tells you that the first person you may need to learn not to leave behind is yourself. That's my story. 9 years, an allotment, and a family that finally had to read its own numbers. If this reminded you to pull one statement tonight and read it like it isn't yours, or to ask who would actually show up for you from a hospital bed, take that as your sign. And do it today.